Congratulations on Echo. I've seen the first 3 episodes and I've now got to wait quite a while to see the rest of it. How much of a Marvel fan are you?
I'm a huge Marvel fan. I grew up reading the comic books, and more specifically, like I grew up, deeply steeped in the Marvel comic world, and I remember growing up as a kid I was born in 1980, so my heyday with comic books was kind of 88 to like 95 probably, and I remember thinking like, man, these would make great movies. Somebody should really get on this. And this is before the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. This is before the X-Men movies. But I would describe myself as a big fan.
So who would you say is your favorite character?
I particularly gravitated towards Spider-Man because he was a teenager. He was awkward.
And he's cheeky.
He's cheeky, yeah. He's a cheeky little guy, but he was funny too. He was funny, but then also in the X-Men, I deeply related with their experiences as like there's the superhero side and the mutant side, and there was something about the people that didn't have a choice in what they were born with that I actually came to relate with much later in life.
Now you've directed a number of TV shows like Grey's Anatomy and actually the more recent incarnation of Star Trek as well. Given what you've said, I think I know the answer to this, but how did you feel when Marvel came calling? It's like a dream come true, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I sort of learned about the Echo project kind of probably how everyone else did, which is a press release, Marvel announces they're creating an Echo TV series. And I remember reading that and being like, oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's great. I would love to have the opportunity to direct on that, but I'm not going to get a call, and I got a call and I got a meeting and I got to meet on it. And that's kind of how I came on board.
So how much of the story did you know beforehand, or did you know the story at all?
No, if I'm being honest, I didn't know who the Echo character was because she was introduced in the comic books, but it was sort of after my time. But once I learned about the character, the first thing I did is I picked up the comics, and it's interesting now because like now, as an adult in comic book reading is much different now. It's like I had my iPad, I downloaded the Marvel app, and then I downloaded the comic book and I read through the lines, but I read through the storylines, but. Really was about familiarizing myself with her. And then when the Hawkeye series came out, I got to see who Alakwa was. And I think one of the most interesting aspects about her in that Hawkeye series was the fact that she was a villain. And so for us with Echo, we were encouraged to lean into that. Like we wanted to embrace the fact that she was a villain. We wanted to embrace the fact that she was a little more darker. And that was a very exciting place to be.
I get the feeling, given the extent of your involvement with the show, that it's actually a story that resonates with you because as well as directing, you're the executive producer as well. Why does it speak to you so much?
Oh, I was also involved in the criminal underworld in New York. And no, I'm kidding. No, it's a. My uncle is also Vincent D'Onofrio. No, I think it's like Native Americans in front of the camera are often misrepresented and misportrayed. Like the portrayal is usually it ranges from false to racist, right? And I remember growing up and anytime a Native American was on camera, it was an exciting thing, and there were so few and so far between these instances. And you had like films like Dances with Wolves, Last of the Mohicans that were like, they weren't created by Native people. And I remember even like the Disney Pocahontas, the animated series, which is, that's problematic on a whole other level. But I remember there was a behind the scenes making of junket on the show, and the animators were talking about, well, we went back to the shows that we grew up with, which were these old westerns, these old Hollywood westerns, like those John Ford era shows, and then we drew influence from those. Well, those were actually drawn from stereotypes from people who weren't native. And so it was like this derivative thing they were taking from.
They were just echoing it.
Yeah,
Terrible pun, I
echoing,
know,
yeah.
but that's what
to
they
bring
were
it back
doing.
around. Yeah. And so, with something like this, to have the opportunity to have indigenous voices, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera, and creating this from the ground up, it was an incredible opportunity, and it's an incredible honor. And, and again, like, Marvel has been so supportive in our quest for authenticity.
I was looking at your Instagram page, and
Oh, no.
and on your most recent post, Alakwa commented that Maya is Marvel's first native deaf badass. Is that how you describe her?
You know what? I wish I came up with that. It was actually so we've sort of been talking about in Edit Bay is like, she's not a hero, she's not a hero, she's not a hero, and she's the anti-hero. What is she? And so I've been saying she's Marvel's first Native American Indigenous deaf character. And we had a premiere in Oklahoma, at the capital of the Choctaw Nation, Durant, Oklahoma, and the chief of the Choctaw Nation, his name is Chief Patton. We all went. There was a powwow that weekend, and he was addressing the powwow, and he says, "I had the pleasure of watching the first couple of episodes of the MCU's first Native American Indigenous deaf badass." And I was like, "Oh man, I wish I thought of that."
Results.
So all the royalties go to Chief Patton for that.
So how groundbreaking do you think she is for the Marvel universe?
For Maya Lopez, I think it's interesting because Maya, she's Indigenous and she's deaf, and I think those are two experiences that are probably very foreign and very unique to a lot of people. But for me, being Indigenous is actually incredibly familiar. And so the important thing for me was being able to focus on the humanity of the character, the humanity of the situations, the emotion of the moments. And those are all universal things that we all experience regardless of our background. And so hopefully, we're not aspiring to be groundbreaking, we're aspiring to tell a human story. And if nothing else, that would be our goal.
I love the moments in the show where we're taken into Maya's silent world. They don't last very long, but they leave a very, very lasting impression. And I wondered where that idea came from.
That came from our research and our I had to push what I sort of knew and challenge what my preconceptions even, And so one of the things for us was, in the same way that we had Native writers both in front of behind the camera, we had deaf involvement in front of behind the camera. So that meant we had deaf writers in the writers' room. That meant we had deaf consultants behind the scenes. That meant we had an American Sign Language master who was translating our scripts for us, in Doug Ridloff, and translating from English to American Sign Language, because the two are not the same. It's not one-to-one. And then we also had multiple, deaf Indigenous actors and actresses in front of the camera as well too. But by surrounding ourselves with those voices, we were at a lot of really, really great things were able to come from that. So, like, for example, the deaf POV was something where we tried to incorporate into the series, where we put the audience into Maya's perspective and experience a scene as she was experiencing it. Her relatives are all, they have varying degrees of proficiency in sign language. You've got like somebody like her cousin Bonnie, who's extremely proficient in signs but doesn't speak, and you've got other relatives that do what's called simcomming, which is they sign and they speak. And so really it was that all of those things together don't happen without having those voices behind the scenes.
One question I've got to ask you, because it made me laugh when I first saw it. One of the big locations is the skate hall, and it's got that brilliant slogan on the wall, "Make America Skate Again," which kind of makes you think of something else. But whose bright idea was that? Because it's great.
That is Stephen Paul Judd. He's one of our writers. He's Choctaw too. He's Choctaw. He's from Oklahoma, and he came up. So funny story. So he came up with the slogan "Make America Skate Again," and we're not saying anything political by that, but funny story. we were scouting, we were location scouting in Georgia. And so we looked at a variety of roller rinks, and one roller rink we walked into, great location, looked great. It was very photogenic. And on the wall was a mural that said, "Make America Skate Again." And I looked at it, and I looked over my production designer, and I was like, "You did that as a joke, right? As a prank." And he was like, "That was here. That was here." So somebody, two people in two different parts of the country had the same idea to do a play on words and say, "Make America Skate Again." And it ended up being a sign that was the location to shoot at. And I mean, it was our location regardless, but that was a very fun coincidence.
That was beautiful. Sydney, thank you so much indeed.
Oh, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey, you guys!